I did not realize the song was just going to start over again. And so while I could see that it was going, I thought the song was still going. So anyway, welcome everybody to the live stream. This is Theory Underground, and I'm your host, David McKerracher, and today I'm very confused, or at least I was very confused. I gave everybody bad information. You might know what I'm talking about if you received an email about 2 hours ago saying that there was going to be a live stream lecture during this time. It's not happening. See, when I sent the email out a few days ago to the course participants for the Being in Time course, I said it was going to be Wednesday the 23rd. There is no such thing as Wednesday the 23rd. So I just found out it's Tuesday. And so what I was going to do, well, what I am doing tomorrow is not what I'm doing today. But I still wanted to do something because I'm prepared, as you can see. Like, I'm set up. Actually, you probably can't see how set up I am because you can't really see my whole setup here. But the long and short of it is I just spent a couple of hours getting everything put together. And so it's very, very nice. That's something that I've gotten used to doing because I've moved so many times in the last few years. But this move that just happened was a big one. I had to wake up at 2:50 in the morning, 2 mornings in a row. The first morning, because we had a flight, Ann and I had a flight from Mexico back to the United States. But there was a delay because of a volcano in Mexico City. Basically, it's been erupting, and there's ash everywhere. And so the flight got basically delayed, which means that we missed our connection. So they ended up getting us a hotel and everything like that, and it got delayed by about 24 hours. And then this morning, I had to wake up at 2:50 again. And this time, I was just traveling all day. And the whole time I was thinking, I've got a lecture today. I did not have a lecture today, but I'm prepared to do something. I wanted to do something. And so actually I've invited a couple of people to hopefully join, but I'm planning on, no matter what, just reading from some sections of history of the concept of time. For instance, I'm thinking about reading a section called Rickert's Misunderstanding of Phenomenology and Intentionality. I think Heidegger defending Husserl is a really interesting thing because in a lot of ways he is a critic of Husserl, but he also defends Husserl from uncharitable or ignorant interpretations that are still alive and well with us to this day. So that's one thing I want to talk about. I will also probably want to jump ahead to the section after intentionality that gets into categorical intuition. But some people are probably wondering, well, what is all this? What are you talking about? What is this book? So quick little background information. History of the Concept of Time is the lecture course from 1925 that Heidegger gave about 2 years before he wrote Being in Time, his magnum opus, the one that really was his breakout success. But before that, he was already breaking out. The administration at his university told him, you need to publish something, man, because we want to make you like a full-time lecturer and a real professor here, but you actually have to have published something. And so History of the Concept of Time is one of the lecture courses that got him a lot of critical acclaim. It got a lot of people talking, and for good reason, because there was something going on with phenomenology, something going on with Schelling and Husserl, and a lot of people were wondering what's going on over there. And then Heidegger starts doing these lectures over the course of the 1920s, and people start taking note. They're going, this guy's dynamic. This guy's got a critique of everybody. He's also super based in Husserl's phenomenology, but he also has his own critique of it. And there was something mesmerizing about his lecture style that was drawing a lot of people in. But then when they got their hands on Being in Time, people realized, oh shit, there's something here. There's something here that we have to really take seriously. And so I actually just published a piece on my blog as well as my Substack called The Missing Introduction to Being in Time. Now, if you actually open a copy of Being in Time, you'll see there is an introduction. It's a 2-part introduction. It's over 40 pages long. But while that is a very important piece of that text, it's more accurate to call it an afterword because he wrote it afterward. Now, of course, he calls it an introduction and puts it at the beginning because he wants you to read it there. But he's writing it in hindsight. You know, his project did not exactly turn out the way he'd originally planned, and now he's making sense of his project to you. But he doesn't kind of do the work that the book itself achieves. So that's kind of assumed. If you really want the introduction, though, this is what I argue, then you want to turn to History of the Concept of Time. And so specifically, the introduction and chapters 1 through 3. I think that this is more important than the actual introduction to Being in Time. If you're getting into Being in Time for the first time, this is one of the most notoriously difficult texts from the history of philosophy. It's highly problematic and complicated, and it's just one of these sorts of complicated knots that you want to untie, but it takes a while, and you really get lost in the process for a while. And anything that can kind of speed up that process is going to be good. Now, there's lots of fantastic secondary texts and introductions to this text. The Hubert Dreyfus's Being in the World is a very famous one for reading. It's basically a companion to the first division of Being in Time. The problem with it is, the scholarship has really moved on since then, and it doesn't even get into the second division. And we're going to read the first and second division. I mean, the second division is very important, extremely important, especially if you're interested in existentialism, if you're interested in the time aspect, if you're interested in what it really means to take a resolute stand and live a life that you're not going to regret, that is not one that can just be traded for any other life, right? You want to live a life that is powerful and meaningful. That is what he's trying to get to in Division 2. Really, Division 1, to only focus on Division 1 is a real problem, because Division 1, in a sort of sense, it's the setup that he is going to kind of explode in a lot of ways in Division 2. So what I'm saying is there's all these companion texts, such as Dreyfus's work. They're helpful if you have infinite time and energy, but I think getting to kind of know Heidegger's voice, even though, of course, we're not reading in German, just getting to know his voice, it does come through in translation, is important. And he's a lot easier to understand a lot of the time in his lectures than he is in his written works. And History of the Concept of Time is a lecture course. And so I think that this is exactly what the doctor ordered. So the introduction in chapters 1 through 3 of History of the Concept of Time lays all the groundwork that gets presupposed by Being in Time, and it's really the stuff that you need if you want to have some kind of a basis in like what's going on, right? Like, he tells you who the major players are before him. He tells you about Schelling and Husserl and Brentano and what's the name of the guy with Dilthey? I don't know how to say his name properly because I only read it, but a lot of this is stuff I'm going to talk about in the lecture tomorrow, and today what I'm going to focus on is just doing an exegetical reading of portions of this text, starting with page 32. So we'll go there first. Page 32 is where it begins, Rickard's misunderstanding of phenomenology and intentionality. So at this point, he's already introduced the division between the human and natural sciences. He's already talked about why he thinks that this is a problematic division for philosophy of science to get stuck in and reify. And he thinks that for a genuine philosophy of science, we're going to have to do a real back to the basics thing, since after all, that's what all the sciences of the time were doing as well. There were radical transformations and crises occurring in all the sciences, and so they were all looking for new grounds, and philosophy of science was kind of just being a handmaiden to the sciences. And Heidegger saying, no, we need to take a step back and really get back to like the original experience that precedes the division between human and natural sciences, as well as the division between consciousness and the world of objects, which gets taken for granted after Descartes. So the reason this is problematic is because we don't actually have a direct, immediate, empirical experience of consciousness in a pure form, nor do we have a direct, unmediated experience of objects in some pure form outside of the context or relation to us, right? Our context or relation to us. Intentionality, which I'm just going to kind of skip over the parts where he really unpacks intentionality. The chapter 2 starts with the fundamental discoveries of phenomenology, its principle, and the clarification of its name. The first one being intentionality, right? I'm going to just skip that part because I'm basically explaining it to you right now in short form, and it's basically just that consciousness is always consciousness of something. There's no pure consciousness. There's just consciousness of things. And those things are not just representations, but actual things in the world. And those things in the world are always seen from a perspective. And if we try to systematize them in some broader theory, then that's always done from a presumed standpoint. Or we, make some kind of thought experiment of like the God's eye view of pure objectivity, but this is an abstraction. It's an abstraction that doesn't actually have a basis in empirical reality. And so it is what they would call a dogmatic abstraction, or some dogmatic metaphysics creeping in, acting as though it's not metaphysics. And so intentionality, to say it the way that Brian Becker did, I published this video recently. It was an interview I did with Brian Becker from Sublimity and Sublation. I always get his channel's name wrong, but Brian Becker, it's a professor we all love to death. He talks about it as the glue between subject and object, right? Heidegger is going to take that to another level, beyond glue, right? He's going to get into some other shit with being in time. And it's so powerful that it forever changes the game for basically all continental philosophy, even for those continental philosophers who, avoided Heidegger as much as they possibly could. It influenced everybody. It was so powerful because of where he takes it. I will basically build up to that point and then talk about that tomorrow. But today, I'm just going to say that's enough about intentionality. If you want the rest of it, watch the conversation that I had with Brian Becker, watch a lot of his videos, or watch my lecture tomorrow. But for today, what I want to stick to is a conversation about an exegetical reading of Rickard's misunderstanding of phenomenology and intentionality. because like I said, I think this is still relevant today. So this is probably the point to timestamp as far as when the exegetical reading begins for people who are watching this in the future, who want to jump straight to the part where I begin reading. So we'll have to timestamp right about now. So this is section B of chapter 2. It says, Rickert's misunderstanding of phenomenology and intentionality. In the reception of intentionality, as well as in the way in which Brentano was interpreted and developed, everyone saw not so much the exposition of this composition of the structure of lived experience as what they suspected in Brentano, metaphysical dogmas. Really quick, Brentano is introduced in the previous chapter. Brentano was Husserl's mentor, and he's a critic of Cartesianism because he doesn't like the idea of this abstract consciousness idea completely removed from the world. But he's still pretty Cartesian, Heidegger claims, and so is Husserl. But Husserl goes way beyond Brentano. We'll get into that later. The decisive thing about Husserl was that he did not look to the dogmas and presuppositions so far as these were there, but to the phenomenon itself, that perceiving is a directing itself toward. And now this structure cannot be disregarded in the other forms of comportment as well. I want to highlight a couple of words here. Why is my mouse like this? Hold on. Okay, there we go. I want to highlight perceiving as directing itself toward, as well as the word structure. So he's saying that directing itself toward, all hyphenated, is a structure. It's a structure that cannot be disregarded in the other forms of comportment. So that is to say, there are other forms of comportment. What is comportment? It's basically a word that means like going about your day, doing things, right? So the point is that directing itself toward is a structure of conscious activity, but not conscious activity as some kind of like pure consciousness, but conscious activity as consciousness of things, right? Now, for Heidegger, of course, he's going to take this comportment thing to a whole different level, and I'll get into that tomorrow. But I want to keep reading. I just wanted to highlight these words, specifically comportment, structure, and directing itself toward. Because ultimately, the goal of both Husserl and Heidegger is to come up with the tried and true structures of lived experience itself. Now, for Husserl, this is very abstract shit. For Heidegger, it's a lot more like existential. But both of them are coming up with structures that they are trying to derive from a rigorous engagement with the things themselves after bracketing off metaphysical dogmas and presuppositions, such as, the idea of a pure consciousness. They want to dispense with the idea of a pure consciousness and say, if we really look at the situation, do we see a pure consciousness? No. We've never experienced a pure consciousness. What we experience is consciousness of dreams, consciousness of hallucinations, consciousness of picking things up and moving them around because you're trying to get somewhere, or you're trying to eat, or you're trying to whatever. You're comporting yourself around the world. You're always doing something, and you're directing yourself towards the things that you're perceiving. By the way, what's up, Dangerous Maybe? Wow, you look so professional. Thanks for this exegetical reading, Professor McKerracher. I got this suit because I went to a wedding in Mexico, and then I didn't want to have it get ruined in my suitcase, and so I just wore it on the plane today. And so this is just how I've been looking all day, and I thought, look, I feel good wearing this. Come on, might as well do my exegetical reading like this. I was going to do it. I was going to be wearing this for the lecture, actually. I'll probably wear something different for the lecture, though. Anyway, so thanks, Mikey. Rickard makes this the basis of his argument and disputes seeing such a thing in these comportments. Okay, what does Rickard make the basis of his argument? Let's go back. But now this structure cannot be disregarded in the other forms of comportment as well. Is this saying that Rickard disregards? Thinks that this is not in other forms of comportment? I'm kind of confused. Rickard reserves intentionality for the comportment relating to judgment, but drops it for representing. Oh, okay. Yeah. So he thinks that maybe it's representing is not directing itself toward. He says representing is not knowing. He comes to this because he is trapped in dogmas. In this case, the dogma that my representing involves no transcendence, that it does not get out to the object. Descartes, in fact, said that representing remains in the consciousness. And Rickard thinks that the transcendence of judging, whose object he specifies as a value, is less puzzling than the transcendence which is in representing, understood as getting out to a real thing. He comes to this view because he thinks that in judgment something is acknowledged which has the character of value, and so does not exist in reality. He identifies it with the mental, which consciousness itself is, and thinks that value is something imminent. When I acknowledge value, I do not go outside of consciousness. Okay, so Rickard is someone who I believe continued Dilthey's project. And in a previous section, Heidegger had already kind of gotten a jab at Rickard by saying, like, his sort of, he basically did like this sort of post-Kantian, neo-Kantian philosophy of science thing to Dilthey's project that really distorted it and sucked everything good out of it. But I don't know. I'm just taking Heidegger at his word here because I haven't read Rickard. But it sounds like Rickard's trying to say, yeah, so he's making this distinction, but he's saying that, what is he saying? Judgment's not a form of knowledge. Hold on. The transcendence of judging, whose object he specifies as a value, is less puzzling than the transcendence which is in representing, understood as getting out to a real thing. He comes to this view because he thinks that in judgment, something is acknowledged which has the character of value, and so does not exist in reality. Yeah, so he's trying to say, like, anything that has a character of value is purely subjective, right? He identifies it with the mental, which consciousness itself is, and thinks that value is something imminent, meaning it's inside the subject, it's not out there in the world. When I acknowledge a value, I do not go outside of consciousness. The essential point for us is not to prove that Rickard is involved in contradictions, that he now uses the phenomenological concept of representing, and now a mythical one from psychology. The point is rather that he lays claim to intentionality in his own starting point to the extent that it fits his theory, but casts it aside when it contravenes his theory that representing is not knowing. So, representing, I just want to clarify, representing in this sense would be like representing something to consciousness, right? Like, so, you know, I'm thinking about something, I'm representing it. I'm representing the thing that I'm thinking about, right? That's representing. So he's saying that that's not knowing. You're not really knowing if you're just representing. What is characteristic is that in spite of all the sagacity, the most primitive of requirements is nevertheless missing: admission of the matters of fact as they are given. The thinking thus becomes groundless. The constraint of the facts cannot in one case be heeded and in others not. Heeded when they fit into a preconceived theory and not heeded when they explode it. A typical example of this kind of thinking is Rickert's theory of knowledge and of judgment, as it takes its starting point from Brentano. We shall review it in order to see how judgments depend upon the apprehension of the matters themselves. All right, so judgments depend on the apprehension of the matters themselves. They're not just pure representations. Rickert takes from Brentano the definition of judgment as acknowledging. We can trace the exact place where he makes use of intentionality as exhibited by Brentano, and at the same time shuts his eyes to it and falls into theory construction. Let us briefly recall the theory which he bases upon Brentano's account of judgment. When we judge, Rickert says, we concur with the representations or we reject them. Invested in the judgment as its essential element is a practical comportment. Quote, since what is valid for judgment must also be valid for knowing, it follows from the kinship that judgment has with willing and feeling, that also in pure theoretical knowing, what is involved is taking a position toward a value. Only in relation to values does the alternative comportment of approval and disapproval make any sense. Rickert thus arrives at his theory that the object of knowledge is a value. When I perceive a chair and say, the chair has 4 legs, the sense of this knowledge, according to Rickert, is the acknowledging of a value. Even with the best of intentions, one cannot find anything like this in the structure of this perceptual assertion. For I am not directed toward representations, and less still toward value, but instead toward the chair, which is, in fact, given. Right? So, my hand has 5 fingers. I'm looking at them right now, right? Like, I see my hand has 5 fingers. Rickert's saying, I'm looking at a value, and that's purely subjective. And Heidegger's like, no, you're looking at your fucking hand. It's your hand, right? This is why Heidegger says we must be naive, right? All of these sort of thought experiments and skeptical sort of question marks put over everything by every previous philosopher in modernity get taken as dogmas, right? You get Locke and Husserl. You get Locke and Hume both saying the same thing. That is what we have are like these representations, and then the question is do these representations match up to reality? And we don't ever have access directly to the things themselves. We just have representations of the things, and we're trying to see if they actually match up, right? He's saying for phenomenology, we're going to kind of dispense with all that. Like, yeah, there might be something to it, but then again, there might not be. And really, what do we actually see? Can we describe what we actually see? Acknowledging is not imposed upon representations. Representing is itself directing itself toward. Representing as such gives the potential about which of judging, and the affirmation in judging is founded in representing. Representing as such gives the potential about which of judging. What does that mean? Representing as such gives the potential about which of judging. Right, yeah, because when you're representing something, then whatever that is the thing that you're going to be able to judge. That's just what that's saying. And the affirmation in judging, either saying this is or is not so, is founded in representing. There is an intentional connection between representing and judging. If Rickert had seen the intentionality of representing, he would not have fallen into the mythology of the connection between judgment and representation, as though judgment comes as an aside. The relations between intentionalities are themselves intentional. Right? So, judging and representing are both 2 forms of intentionality, meaning all representations that you can have, that you can think about, that you can imagine, that you can represent, are representations of something, right? There's no pure form of representation. That's what that point is. Same thing goes for judgment. There's no such thing as judgment. There's judgment of situations, right? But then he's saying that the relations between these intentionalities are themselves intentional. What does that mean? Hence, Rickert arrived at this theory not from a study of the matters themselves, but by an unfounded deduction fraught with dogmatic judgments. The last vestige of the composition of this matter is solely what Rickert took from Brentano, but even here it is questionable whether it is brought to bear upon the full composition of judgment. Quote, when we characterize judgment as a comportment which is not like representation, this does not mean that, with Brentano, we see in it another kind of relation of consciousness to its objects than the kind involved in representation. This claim is for us far too full of presuppositions. Here, Rickert rejects intentionality in Brentano's sense as a criterion distinguishing the comportments of representation and judgment. What does he put in its place? How does he define and ground the distinction? We are investigating. Quote, in what genus of psychic processes the complete judgment belongs when we generally distinguish those states in which we comport ourselves impassively and contemplatively from those in which we take an interest in the content of our consciousness as a content of value to us. We thus simply wish to establish a fact which even a pure sensualistic theory cannot dispute. End quote. I mean, okay. Is that how Rickert writes? One would have to be blind not to see that this is word for word the position of Brentano, who wanted nothing other than to subdivide the genus of psychic processes according to the mode of our comportment, whether we contemplate them impassively or take an active interest in them. Right? So there's things that we contemplate passively, and there's things that we contemplate in a very active and interested way. And basically, Brentano was the original sort of father of phenomenology. He was a kind of proto-phenomenologist before Husserl really made it into something. And basically, Husserl was taking Brentano's vision to another level, right? So Brentano, like Husserl, wants to found basically psychology on the structures that are actually there without a bunch of philosophically loaded baggage read into the situation, right? And so he's trying to use intentionality, the fact of intentionality, to first of all get past the subject-object divide, the idea of a strict dualism, and to say, no, what we actually see is that we're always engaged with this stuff and that we don't ever get access to this stuff outside of a relation to ourselves. And so all this talk of like a pure objectivity or a pure subjectivity, pure representations, pure judgments, pure objects, these things don't really make sense at the level of what we see, right? What we experience. And so shouldn't we be trying to base these? The only reason we talk about these things in these ways is because of a tradition of philosophy. But what if we just said, let's set the tradition aside and just ask ourselves again, what is it that we're experiencing? And so there are various ways that we have passive intentional relations to things and active interests in them. And this distinction is something Brentano was already keen on, and Rickert's acting like he just invented it. So Rickert first takes his theory from a basis which is exposed by Brentano's description, but does not see that he lays claim to intentionality as the foundation of his theory of judgment and knowledge. The proof for this is that while he lays claim to this descriptive distinction, Rickert at the same time employs a concept of representation which runs counter to that which he uses as a basis for securing the definition of judgment, here impassive directing itself toward, accordingly representing as the manner of representing. and their representation as the represented, where the represented is in fact the content of consciousness. Wherever Rickert refutes the idealism of representation and wants to prove that knowing is not representing, he does not restrict himself to the direct and simple sense of representing, but bases himself upon a mythical concept. Rickert says that as long as the representations are only represented, they come and go. Representing is now not direct representational comportment. The representations now get represented. Quote, a knowing that represents needs a reality independent of the knowing subject, because with representations we are capable of apprehending something independent of the knowing subject only by their being images or signs of a reality. End quote. In such a concept of representation, it can of course be shown that representing is not a knowing if the directing itself toward can tend only towards signs. But how does it stand with the concept of representation which Rickert uses when he differentiates the judgment from representing understood as a comportment that simply contemplates? Why does Rickert not take the concept of representation in a descriptive sense as he does the concept of judgment, which has accrued to description? Why does he not go straight to the sense of its implication, namely, a comportment which contemplates impassively? It is because Rickert is guided by the presumption, the thesis, that knowing cannot be representing. For if it were, then his own theory that knowing is acknowledging and the object of knowledge is a value would be superfluous and perhaps wrong. Representing cannot be knowledge. This prejudice is given further weight by an appeal to Aristotle's thesis that knowing is judging. Knowledge is always true or false, and according to Aristotle, only judgments are true or false. In this appeal to Aristotle, Rickert supposes that Aristotle means the same by judgment, whereas Aristotle means precisely that which Rickert is not willing to see in the simple composition of representing as such, letting something be seen. Rickert does not see that the simple sense of representing actually includes knowing. So he makes this appeal to Aristotle to back up his definition or his sort of dogma that he's operating under. But this is not even the sense of the word that Aristotle's using. Rickert is prevented from seeing the primary cognitive character of representation because he presupposes a mythical concept of representing from the philosophy of natural science, and so comes to the formulation that in representing, the representations get represented. But in the case of a representation on the level of simple perception, a representation is not represented. I simply see the chair. This is implied in the very sense of representing. When I look, I am not intent upon seeing a representation of something, but the chair. Take, for example, mere envisaging or bringing to mind, imagining, right? Which is also characterized as a representation of something which is not on hand, as when I now envisage my writing table. Even in such a case of merely thinking of something, what is represented is not a representation, not a content of consciousness, but the matter itself. The same applies to the recollective representation of, for example, a sailboat trip. I do not remember representations but the boat and the trip itself. The most primitive matters of fact, which are in the structures themselves, are overlooked simply for the sake of a theory. Knowing cannot be representing. Okay, he's saying this about Rickert. Knowing cannot be representing, for only then is the theory justified that the object of knowledge is and must be a value, because there must be a philosophy of value. What makes us blind to intentionality is the presumption that what we have here is a theory of a relation between physical and psychic, whereas what is really exhibited is simply a structure of the psychic itself. Whether that towards which representing directs itself is a real material thing or merely something fancied, like whether it's like, okay, I'm thinking about like my actual writing desk, or I'm thinking about a unicorn, right? In either of these cases, acknowledging acknowledges a value, or whether judging directs itself towards something else which is not real, the first thing to see is this directing itself towards as such. So no matter what, whether you're judging or not, or whether it's real or it's not, the point is that intentionality is still there in all of these cases. In all of these cases, there's still your consciousness is directed towards something, right? The structure of comportments, we might say, is to be made secure without any epistemological dogma. It is only when we have rightly seen this that we can, by means of it, come to a sharper formulation and perhaps a critique of intentionality as it has been interpreted up to now. We shall learn that, in fact, even in phenomenology, there are still unclarified assumptions associated with intentionality, which admittedly make it truly difficult for a philosophy so burdened with dogmas as Neo-Kantianism to see plainly what has been exhibited here. As long as we think in dogmas and directions, we first tend to assume something along the same lines. And we hold to what we assume all the more so as the phenomena are not, in fact, exhaustively brought out into the open. When it comes to comportments, we must keep a steady eye solely upon the structure of directing itself toward in them. All theories about the psychic, consciousness, person, and the like must be held in abeyance. So that's the end of that section, and long story short, Rickert is like, oh, I've proved it wrong. I've proved intentionality, it's wrong. And the reason he thinks that he has proven it wrong is well, you don't really have a knowledge of anything in this situation. All you have is a subjective valuation. And the point is yeah, but you know that there is a directing itself toward. Meaning that in every kind of experience that we can talk about, there is always a directing itself towards, which is to say, intentionality is baked into everything. I mean, that's really just the point about intentionality, and Rickert's sitting here trying to disprove it, and Heidegger just showed how he brings a bunch of epistemological dogmas into his analysis, into his argument, and it's dumb. So there you go, Rickert. What are you doing? Now, the reason I wanted to read that section is because it's not something I'm going to be talking about in the lecture tomorrow, but I wanted to give you an idea of Heidegger actually talking like this. Like I wanted to show that. Especially for people who are in this course, because when you read Being in Time, he's not going to, he doesn't like take a critic of phenomenology to task like this and actually tarry with them and walk through their argument and show why it's wrong. It's really cool to see him do something like that. And so that's why I wanted to read that, because like I said, I don't have time for it in the lecture tomorrow. Now, I'm going to skip over the section on the basic constitution of intentionality as such, with the section, the perceived of perceiving, the entity in itself, the environmental thing, natural thing, thinghood. Skipping over all of that. It's very interesting stuff. The next section, the perceived of perceiving, the how of being intended, the perceivedness of the entity, the feature of bodily there, right? What he's talking about in these sections is there are like structures in perception, right? Like there's structures in perception that we can deduce and talk about. And he talks about different modes, talks about bodily presence. You can have the bodily presence of a thing, or you can just have the self-givenness of a thing, right? So like the bridge, it can be, you can have an intentional relation to the bridge in terms of its bodily presence if it's actually like there, right? But it can also just be self-given in the sense that you're thinking about it. It's not, you're not actually in front of the bridge. You're thinking about it, but it is the bridge that you're thinking about. You're not just thinking about signs or representations. You're thinking about the actual bridge. You know the bridge, right? But then there's also empty intending, which is like you have the name for the thing, but you don't actually know what it stands for, right? That would be like empty intending. So these are just kind of like, these are almost, I don't want to use the word natural, but they're basically like natural categories, right? That can be derived from the situation. Oh, what's up, Anne? Yeah, I'm doing a sort of exegetical reading here of different sections because I was in the mood to do it. I was in the mood to do something since I was already ready to do a lecture, but no lecture today. So the next section is called Initial Indication of the Basic Mode of Intentionality as the belonging together of intentio and intentum. Now, in the intentio, it's like the intending something, and the intentum is the thing that's being intended. They go together. And Brentano focused on one side of the two, and he didn't think enough about both sides. That's neither here nor there, because I wanted to just get into categorical intuition, because I think this part's really cool when he's talking about intentional fulfillment and presuming and fulfillment. I think that this part's really cool. So, categorical intuition. And remember, this is not Heidegger's philosophy. We're not reading Being in Time. This is, he's really recapping some of the big moments from basically Husserl's discoveries in phenomenology. So first, I mean, really the main three for Heidegger in terms of the discoveries on the, that phenomenology, specifically Husserl's phenomenology, had achieved. It's like this robust, systematized idea of intentionality, categorical intuition, the section we're about to jump into, and then the original sense of the a priori, which I don't think we'll probably have time to get to that, but I'm just going to dive right into categorical intuition. Really quick, I am curious, is there anybody here? Is anybody watching this live? A lot of people are probably watching this after the fact. If you are watching this after the fact, I would highly encourage you to say hello. Let me know. And let's get into it. Categorical intuition. What calls for clarification under this heading could be discovered only after the exposition of intentionality as a structure. The term intuition corresponds in its meaning to what above was already defined as seeing in the broad sense of that word. Intuition means simple apprehension of what is itself bodily found just as it shows itself. Now, I'm just going to say as a side note, obviously that's not how we use the term in the United States, and they're using it different. So, but intuition has a meaning that goes back thousands of years, meaning like kind of like your sense for the thing as you see it. This has been distorted in American Standard English to basically mean you've got a feeling about something. No. That's just not the way that we're using the word here. And so you'll just kind of have to separate these things because he just said it. Intuition means simple apprehension of what is itself bodily found just as it shows itself. Oh my God, Anne's making Thai curry. Awesome. Cool. She's listening while cooking. That's great. Thanks for letting me know. First, this concept, intuition, carries no prejudice as to whether sense perception is the sole and most original form of intuiting, or whether there are further possibilities of intuition regarding other fields and constituents, right? We'll make no assumptions about the priority of just seeing something, right? Second, nothing should be read into its meaning other than what the phenomenological use of the term specifies, simply apprehending the bodily given as it shows itself. Intuition in the phenomenological sense implies no special capacity, no exceptional way of transposing oneself into otherwise closed domains and depths of the world, not even the kind of intuition employed by Bergson. It is therefore a cheap characterization of phenomenology to suggest that it is somehow connected with modern intuitionism. It simply has nothing to do with it. Okay, good to know. Intuitionism, that I've heard various ways of saying. I don't know too much about what he means by modern intuitionism, but the point is we have to just take the phenomenological meaning of it on its own terms and not get it mixed up with other things. The discovery of categorial intuition is the demonstration first that there is a simple apprehension of the categorial, such constituents in entities which such constituents in entities which in tradition fashion are designated. I cannot read this sentence. Okay, I'm going to start over. The discovery of categorical intuition is the demonstration, first, that there is a simple apprehension of the categorial, such constituents in entities which in traditional fashion are designated as categories, and were seen in crude form quite early. In brackets, it says in Greek philosophy, especially by Plato and Aristotle. Second, it is above all the demonstration that this apprehension is invested in the most everyday of perceptions and in every experience. This only clarifies the meaning of the term. What matters is to exhibit this kind of intuition itself, to bring it to givenness as intentionality, and to make clear what is intuited in it and how. Okay, so what? If we can actually find categories in things by actually just looking at them, then that's a fascinating discovery. And a lot of times categories get developed and then they kind of get their own, they kind of become freewheeling, or they kind of take on a life of their own. And the point is like, okay, but can we just develop intuitive categories, meaning like categories that come out of the things themselves that we are analyzing? And then the last question, what matters is to exhibit this kind of intuition itself, to bring it to givenness as intentionality, right? Because obviously it is a form of intentionality because you are directed towards whatever the thing is that you are trying to find categories in. And to make clear what is intuited in it and how. Okay. It was already suggested that categorical intuition is found in every concrete perception of a thing, as it were, as an inclusion. In order to show this, we shall return to our exemplary case of the perception of this chair. But in order to see the categorical intuition in it, we must be adequately prepared. This calls for two more general considerations. We shall deal with 1. Intentional presuming and its intentional fulfillment, and 2. Intentional comportments as expressed, intuition and expression. Okay. What is he talking about? It's really important to point out here. He says, in order to see the categorical intuition in the chair itself, we must be adequately prepared. Okay. What does he mean that we need to be adequately prepared? It's the exact opposite of this idea that, we can just look at things and go off of our gut, go off of our feelings about it. No. We have to prepare ourselves to have a raw encounter with the thing itself. This is the methodological aspect of the Husserlian project. He's very, very serious about preparing oneself before, so that you don't just bring in a bunch of your inherited cultural baggage into the perception, right? This is actually to safeguard against just whatever you might feel about the thing, and to say, okay, no, but there's no such thing as a direct feeling about anything that you're perceiving, because we bring our own baggage, conceptual baggage, epistemological dogmas, whatever, into the perceiving itself. How to methodologically bracket out those biases and presuppositions so we can actually have like this raw encounter with the thing. And he says, we're just going to use the example of this chair right in front of me so that so I can show you what I'm talking about, how we can talk about what is the kind of intentionality that one can have of a thing so as to derive a sense of a categorical intuition from it. Well, we have to prepare ourselves. So in order to prepare ourselves, we first have to talk about intentional presuming and its intentional fulfillment. I think this is like one of the most interesting parts of this section for sure. It's the next section. I'm really excited to get into that section. But then the other part is intentional comportments as expressed. So what is an intentional comportment? Comportment is like going about your daily dealings. But an intentional comportments, it's like the fact that in your perceptions of things as you go around, your perceptions are always directed towards things, right? They have something to do with the way that you are comporting yourself, whether it's actively, whether it's passively, whether it's in a mode of judging, whether it's in a mode of reflecting, whatever. These are all forms of intentional comportments. But specifically, he says intentional comportments as expressed intuition and expression. Okay, so he says that in italics, meaning we'll have to get more into that. We shall see that our comportments, lived experiences, taken in the broadest sense, are through and through expressed experiences. Even if they are not uttered in words, they are nonetheless expressed in a definite articulation by an understanding that I have of them as I simply live in them without regarding them thematically. So that's really cool because the point is like perception is itself already expression. He says you don't have to articulate it with words. You don't have to thematize it. You don't have to theorize it. The point is you've perceived things, and those perceptions are laden with meaning, right? So they're already being expressed in some way. In his later work, in Being in Time especially, he's going to talk about how things are disclosed and the fact that we, in dealing with things, disclose those things in specific ways, right? But it's always in this sort of sense intentional, meaning that it's not that we just have some comprehension of the objective thing in itself, nor do we stay locked inside of consciousness, inside of our mind, separated from the world. No, like there's no such thing as pure consciousness. There's only consciousness of actual things, even if those actual things are hallucinations. He'll say, like the fact is it's still intentionality. You're still directed towards things, and there's no getting outside of being in the world, directed towards things, probably because of motives, which is something else that he'll get into later with his own work a lot. So section A, intentional presuming and intentional fulfillment. Nance, what's up, man? How's it going? Also, Teresa, good to see you. They didn't realize people would be coding for it 100 years later to market to people after they thought it intuitively, theoretically. I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but they definitely didn't see us live streaming, reading it. I guarantee you, as Heidegger was saying these words to his classroom and students were writing down the notes that became what I'm reading here, Heidegger had no idea live streaming would exist. And he definitely didn't know that David McKerracher would be reading his lecture notes on Theory Underground. A, identification as demonstrative fulfillment or demonstrative fulfillment. Our account. So this is the part. So even if you haven't gone back and watched everything else up to this point, Obviously, people joining in the future, you've watched everything up to this point, so good job. But for anybody just kind of popping in now, this is a cool part. So let's just get into it. Identification as demonstrative fulfillment. Our account of the interrelation of the modes of representation manifested a distinct sequence of levels ranging from mere empty intending, signitive acts, to originally giving perception, intuitive act in the narrowest sense, right? So mere empty intending, that's just like you're just using words to signify things, but you actually don't even know what you're signifying, right? Like I could talk about, I don't know, any technical terminology that is outside of my wheelhouse, but I throw it around in a conversation like I know what I'm talking about. That would be empty intending, right? Or if your teacher says, all right, well, today we're going to learn about square roots. And you go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm learning about square roots. Well, when you said that, you are empty intending. You don't actually know what your consciousness is directing itself towards. It's really just a sort of a placeholder, a black box that is hopefully going to get filled in, and not, you know, if it's more like standard schooling today, then it's not going to get filled in by anything beyond memorization, right? That remains empty intending. It only becomes some more fully fledged intuitive act in a narrower sense if you actually get to the like an intimate understanding of what a square root is. Empty intending is unfulfilled in its sense, in its meaning. What is presumed in it is there in the how of non-fulfillment. Empty intending, or what is presumed in it, can in a certain sense be fulfilled in intuitive envisaging. Okay. In a certain sense, be fulfilled in intuitive envisaging. What is intuitive envisaging? Like he uses the word envisaging to basically talk about imagining, right? So you can start to fill something out that was basically just a placeholder, and that's probably through things like you're guessing, you're hypothesizing, you're deducing, you're inferring, you're inducing, etc. The presumed envisaged is thus given in greater or lesser completeness. So, for instance, with a bridge, you go, well, it probably has columns, railings, types of arches, arrangements of the building stones, right? So you have some kind of a vague idea of like what a bridge is like. But however great the perfection of the fullness may be, it always manifests a difference from the fullness of perception, which gives the entity bodily. But even here, if we restrict ourselves to the sense perception of material things, the fullness is not total. Sense perception indeed gives the entity originarily, but always only from one side, right? You do not have God's eye vision. You cannot see something from every angle and at every level, zoomed in and zoomed out, right? You cannot see something like that. You can only see something from any given side at any given time. Like if you see me right now, you do not see the back of my head. You see me, but you do not see the back of my head. And I would just add, right, because this is an exegetical reading, so I can use this as an example, you do see me right now. You do not just... A philosopher might say, well, no, I see a representation of you, Dave. These are pixels on a computer, and you could go into all the software and the hardware involved, and that's really what you're seeing. Yeah, but you're seeing me, right? Like, you can read all this extra philosophical stuff into it, but you're seeing me. You're like, well, no, I'm seeing a reflection of you. What does that mean? What you're reading into this. Now, for instance, I could be AI generated. This could be a hallucination, in which case you're not seeing me. You're actually seeing a simulation of me. But to say, oh no, I'm just seeing a representation of you is kind of like saying, oh no, I'm just seeing a simulation of you, right? But no, you're actually seeing me right now. This is a live stream, right? So I know it's kind of counterintuitive and seemingly naive for anybody who kind of comes from a philosophy background, but that's the kind of move that Heidegger is admiring right now. Because this is, once again, not Heidegger's philosophy. He is giving you some cool shit that Husserl has done. He's like, this shit that Husserl does, the way that he thinks, it's awesome. The way that Husserl sees, it's great. I've learned a lot from him. He's awesome. That's what this is all about right here. So he's basically steel-manning Husserl before he later critiques him. So anyway, he says, but however great the perfection of the fullness may be, it always manifests a difference from the fullness of perception, which gives the entity bodily. Right? So, meaning that, like, if you flesh out in your mind's eye what a bridge is like in a super full, rich detail, it's never going to be the same thing as actually looking at it in with your body, like being there with it in front of you, right? Being able to walk around it and fill in the details for yourself. But even here, if we restrict ourselves to the sense perception of material things, the fullness is not total. Sense perception indeed gives the entity originarily, but always only from one side. However adequate a perception may be, the perceived entity always shows itself only in a particular adumbration. This is probably the most important word to learn, actually. I actually remember a professor was like, why did you use that word? You don't have to use that word. That's just big words. Why are you using big words? And it's like, it was a really weird comment on my paper because the professor in question knows about phenomenology. And it's just like, I'm sorry, this is the words that we use when doing phenomenology. An adumbration is simply this. You're seeing something from an angle. Okay, that's an adumbration of the thing. You see it from another angle. That's another adumbration. These adumbrations add up so that you get a more full picture. Okay? If you see one side of the soccer ball, that's just one adumbration. But you are able to, off of that one adumbration, infer that the rest of the ball is probably there. Right? Yeah. There are thus distinctions which, with regard to the definitiveness and completeness of the fullness, which a fulfilling intuition is capable of giving. We accordingly speak of a definitive and thoroughgoing fulfillment when on the side of presuming all the partial intentions are fulfilled, and on the side of the intuition which bestows fulfillment, that intuition presents the whole matter in its totality. That's a lot of words. He's basically just saying, like, here, I'm going to hold this screwdriver. I can look at it in every detail. I could take a bunch of notes, think about every little angle on this thing, and eventually I could have like this. I could be like, oh, I've got the whole matter in its totality. But nevertheless, that totality is not something that you ever actually have the mental grasp on. Like you can only ever mentally even see one side of it at a time, right? You can never see every side of it all at the same time, either in person or in your mind's eye. So we're always taking up a standpoint is what he's saying. The interrelation of these modes of representations is a functional interrelation which is always prefigured in their intentionality. Empty intending, envisaging, sense perception are not simply coordinated as species in a genus, as when I say that apples, pears, peaches, and plums are fruits. Rather, these modes stand to one another in functional relation, and the fulfillment itself is of an intentional character, right? So empty intending, what was that again? It's like the placeholder effect. Like you don't really, so it's like someone says bridge. Well, you don't know what bridge they're talking about, but you've got some kind of an idea of the bridge. So then you can envision, you can imagine the bridge. Okay, and then there's actual sense perception of a bridge. Okay, But these are not species of a genus, right? These are all different kinds of intentionality, meaning different ways of being directed towards things. Rather, these modes stand to one another in functional relation, and the fulfillment itself is of an intentional character. Fulfillment means having the entity present in its intuitive content so that what is at first only emptily presumed in it demonstrates itself as grounded in the matters. Okay, that's a very important definition there. So fulfillment, right? We have like this this idea of the bridge, right? And then you think, oh, okay, the bridge, it's probably made of stones. It probably has like, you think it through. You get some kind of an idea of what you're going to see. You imagine it, and then you actually see it, right? But seeing it, like, there's a cash out like moment of its fulfillment. It's the word fulfillment almost sounds like gratification, right? Or you could even use the word confirmation, or you could say that the confirmation corrects like what you had been imagining, right? But all of this is what he's calling fulfillment, right? For any given thing that you see from, or that you hear about from some standpoint, you get some figment of an idea about it. And then you can think about it, you can imagine about it, you can ask questions about it, you can delve deeper into it. It really helps if you can get sensory actual experience of the thing. That helps you get a much richer, more in-depth idea of it. Obviously, you could read a bunch of books about it, whatever it is. But the empty presumption, the empty intention can get filled out, can get fulfilled, and this can be done in a way that is grounded in the matters, right? So an example of being grounded in the matters, you go check out the bridge for yourself. Now you're looking at it, right? Perception, or what it gives, points out, demonstrates. The empty intention is demonstrated in the state of affairs given in intuition. The originary perception gives the demonstration. The peculiar thing is that there is a correlation in such demonstration or fulfillment. Let us look at this more concretely. I can, in an empty way, now think of my desk at home simply in order to talk about it. I can fulfill this empty intention in a way by envisaging it to myself, and finally by going home and seeing it itself in an authentic and final experience. In such a demonstrative fulfillment, the emptily intended and the originally intuited come into coincidence. This bringing into coincidence, the intended being experienced in the intuited as itself and self-same, is an act of identification. Okay, so an act of identification is to say, I was imagining the screwdriver and what it would be like. Oh, now I'm actually seeing it. Now there's an act of identification, right? That's where the idea and the thing itself come into coincidence, as he says. The intended identifies itself in the intuited. Self-sameness is experienced. Sorry, that's the sentence. Self-sameness is experienced. Here it is well to note that in this act of identification, the identity is not apprehended thematically as self-sameness, right? You don't go to your writing desk and then think theoretically like, oh, this is the self-same desk as the one that I was envisaging. No, you've just identified the desk, right? He's saying there's not like, this is not a theoretical thing. This is just like the fact. You're just apprehending it. The identification is not some abstract thing. It's just like, oh, the thing is a thing. Identification is for its part not already an apprehension of identity, but solely of the identical. inasmuch as intuition is bodily originary, it gives the entity itself, the matter itself. Now, so what does he mean? Inasmuch as intuition is bodily imaginary. Well, intuition is often, not imaginary, originary. Intuition is often, first and foremost, bodily originary, meaning that the things that we know about are things that we've seen, they're things that we've had these intuitive experiences with. And remember, intuition, the way we're using it, it's just seeing it. You've just seen it, right? This kind of bodily intuition being original, what is he saying about it? It gives the entity itself. It gives the matter itself, right? If you saw the bridge or the writing desk with your own eyes, right? Well, then you have a much more intimate basis in the matter itself than a person who's only been guessing what it's like, right? The emptily presumed is compared to the matter itself, so that in fulfillment I obtain insight into the matter itself. More precisely, I obtain insight into the groundedness in the matter of what was before only presumed. This fulfillment as an act of identification includes obtaining insight into the grounding of what is presumed in the matter. This act of obtaining insight as identifying fulfillment is called evidence. Evidence as identifying fulfillment. I can read at least another page before I go. Nance, if you are watching this, go ahead and hop in if you got that link still. Because I'm worried that Zoom's going to kick me out of this video call because I'm the only person in it. Evidence as identifying fulfillment. Identifying fulfillment is what we call evidence. Evidence is a specific intentional act, that of identifying the presumed and the intuited. The presumed is itself illuminated in the matter. This elaboration of evidence was for the first time brought to a successful resolution by Husserl, who thus made an essential advance beyond all the obscurities prevalent in the tradition of logic and epistemology. But it has not had much of an effect. Even today, we still adhere to the traditional mythological account of evidence in regarding it as a peculiar indicator of certain lived experiences, especially experiences of judgment. It is something like a sign which wells up at times in the soul and announces that the psychic process with which it is associated is true. To some extent, it is as if a psychic datum announces that there is something real outside which corresponds to the judging. As everyone knows, this transcendent reality cannot itself become imminent, right? So this idea of like this outside that got confirmed cannot just become inside, right? Like inside of the subject, right? He's critiquing this. So there must be a way in which it can be announced on the inside. This is the so-called feeling of evidence of Rickert, who he was critiquing earlier. But if we see that the acts of identifying apprehension are defined by intentionality, then we do not resort to the mythological account of evidence as psychic feeling or psychic datum, as though a pressure were first exerted and then it dawns on one that the truth is indeed there. It is further customary to regard evidence as an addition to a specific class of lived experiences, that of judgments. This restriction, along with the concept of evidence as a possible addition to psychic processes, do not correspond to the findings. It is readily seen that evidence in general is comprehensible only if we regard the intentionality in it, now understood as identifying apprehension. But this, at the same time, yields a fundamental insight of great significance. Since the act of evidence connotes, or means, an identifying vision that selects a state of affairs from the originarily intuited matter, Evidence is, in its sense, always of a sort and rigor which varies according to the ontological character of the field of the subject matter, the intentional structure of the kind of apprehensive access, and the possibility of fulfillment grounded therein. Damn! So that's a lot of words. I could see that being confusing. In fact, I am confused. Let's go over it again. I think I get what he's saying. Since the act of evidence connotes or means an identifying vision that selects a state of affairs from the originarily intuited matter, evidence is, in its sense, always of a sort and rigor which varies according to the ontological character of the field of subject matter, the intentional structure of the kind of apprehensive access, and the possibility of fulfillment grounded therein. He's saying different kinds of evidence and different kinds of what is the word? Identification fulfillment are going to exist for different kinds of subject matters. We therefore speak of the regionality of evidence. All evidence is, in its sense, geared to a corresponding region of subject matter. It is absurd to want to transpose one possibility of evidence, for example, the mathematical, into other kinds of apprehension. The same holds for the idea of rigor of theoretical demonstration, which in its sense is built upon the concept of evidence peculiar to each type: philosophical, theological, psychic, or physical. With all this regionality, on the other hand, the universality of evidence must again be stressed. Evidence is a universal function, first of all acts which give their objects, and then of all acts evidence of willing and wishing, of loving and hoping. It is not restricted to assertions, predications, judgments. In this universality, it at the same time varies according to the region of subject matter and the kind of access to it. We have thus arrived at 1. The idea of pure and absolute evidence, apodicticity as insight into essential states of affairs. 2. The idea of insight into individual states of affairs, subject matters, assertoric evidence. 3. The idea of a connection of these two, the insight into the necessity of an individual state of affairs being so, based upon the essential grounds of the posited individual. Truth as demonstrative identification is the next section, but I can't get into it. This is just really cool stuff. I wanted to read some of it because this is like the stuff that's like overflowing. I can't get into all of this stuff in the lecture tomorrow, but it's so cool. And it's like, he says, look, I can't give you a summary of Husserl's work because phenomenology cannot be summarized. It becomes like it's dead when it gets summarized. You just have to undergo it yourself and take on these investigations anew every time. But he nonetheless is going to say, look, there's some stuff that's fucking awesome discoveries that have come out of things. And so he's like all of this stuff is coming out under the section on categorical intuition. And the point is that we do have access to some facts that we were not aware that were facts, and they're facts about who we are and how we perceive. And these facts are structures of our experience itself. And phenomenology is a fidelity to seeing in a way that just tries to tease out from experience structures of experience so that we can actually say things about humans that are just true, because that's pretty badass. But also, not only just so that we can say it, but also because doing so can show that either the common sense of the world or what's being taken for granted in academic philosophy at the time, or psychology for that matter, is loaded with epistemological dogmas that might have some basis or some sort of use value, or some kind of like they get at something true perhaps. But the question is, should they be taken as the whole truth? Should they be taken unquestionably, without question, right? For phenomenology, the point is to throw all of what's taken for granted into relief and stark contrast against the most radical attempt at getting back to the things themselves, which is actually this section right here, the meaning of the maxim to the matters themselves, or to the things themselves. I don't know. I hope that this will serve as a kind of a trailer for people. Go read chapter 2 of History of the Concept of Time. I really think that it's fascinating stuff, and it's not the Heidegger that you're used to if you read Being in Time or any of his later works. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much the things that I wanted to cover. I just really wanted to do an exegetical reading. I really wanted to hang out for a little bit and, wear my suit and read Heidegger in preparation for the lecture tomorrow. So tomorrow will be Wednesday the 24th, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Join for the live stream. I will be with Nick Castellucci as well as potentially others. But Nick will be the main other, who will be kind of my dialogic partner in the lecture. I've got a bunch of slides prepared, a bunch of stuff I'm going to go over that doesn't even really get into any of the stuff I was reading today. And I'm going to try to give you chapters 1 and 2 in broad strokes because it's really useful background knowledge for kind of getting what's going on. Like, what is the project of Being in Time? Like, why does Heidegger draw from phenomenology, but then also think he's superseding it or critiquing it? Why is he defending it and then critiquing it? Like, what is his critique of it? Like, obviously, he doesn't think Rickert has it figured out, as we were reading earlier. But like, so what's the point? What is he doing with it? And I would just say that, like, this introduction plus chapters 1 through 3 of History of the Concept of Time really is the missing introduction of Being in Time. And in fact, I just published this. Let's see if I can show this with you. Let's see if I can show it with you. Hold on one sec. Let me see if I can share. Here we go. Boom. Let me uncrop. This is the post that I just posted to Theory Underground today. Check it out if you want to read more about why I think that this is a really good introduction to Being in Time. It's what I wish I had read going into Being in Time, because I really had no idea like what was going on with the project, what was his initial intention, like what was he kind of doing, because his phenomenological investigations take him in a different direction than he was initially going, really. And so you want to understand that? I think it's useful. And you might be going, well, I don't want to read Being in Time. I've got no interest in reading Being in Time. Well, good for you. I'm talking about people who are interested in it. And admittedly, that's not like the largest number of people, but this is one of the most important texts to understand if you want to really be in the continental philosophy conversation, because almost every great continental philosopher is seriously impacted by Heidegger and at the same time a big-time critic of Heidegger. So you can't really know what's going on there if you don't get your basis in this text. And this text will teach you how to read. It will accelerate the development of your reading comprehension exponentially, because there are a few texts that are as difficult yet at the same time intuitive. And that's a really useful combination, I think. So speaking of, there's a lecture tomorrow, and then on June 3rd is actually the beginning of the Being in Time course. Now, there's not a lot of people signed up. I'm actually I haven't done a huge marketing push for this course because I want to keep it pretty small. My decision was to basically do like a sort of research cohort. It's a relatively small group. And we're going to go through this text in a pretty short period of time. Division 1 will begin on June 3rd and go through July 22nd. And then the second division will begin on August 19th and go through October. And my goal is to really get the lectures together, really redo this reading. This will be about my third reading in most cases, and then from that develop on-demand courses that people could binge or that I could lead cohorts through in the future. And so, this will not be the only opportunity to do this. This might be the first time you've heard of Being in Time and it's a difficult challenge to undertake, and so you're thinking, well, there's no way in hell I'm doing that this summer. But you might decide you want to do it someday, and my goal is to have something epic set up for you to make it so this text really opens up for you in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. Okay, that's my goal. And if you are interested in all that, well, theory-underground.com is where you want to go. You click on courses, and you'll find the Being in Time course there. So, boom, right here, Being in Time Divisions 1 and 2. Click on that. You'll be able to sign up for the course. There's different tiers for different levels of involvement. There's different tiers for really what you're trying to get out of the course. You can just audit it, but you can also get into it really seriously. And so I'm just getting antsy and excited about this because it's going to be like a big undertaking, and I'm doing it with some of my favorite people. And so I'm fucking stoked, and I'm really excited to do it. The critical media theory and digital literacy, that's coming up as well. And so I'm actually going to play the advertisement for the What is Sex course, the digital literacy and critical media theory, and the Being in Time course, as well as it will talk about the financial aid scholarship that we've set up, or that I set up at Theory Underground, as well as the countrywide tour. It doesn't talk about the books that we're going to be pushing on tour. There's a lot of really exciting stuff. Stay tuned. I've got some big news to be rolling out soon. I know I've not been super active on this channel, and that's because I'm doing way more important things that are going to have hopefully a bigger impact later. But in the meantime, this channel suffers with the algorithm. It also suffers because I fucking do exegetical readings, and that's definitely not something incentivized by the algorithm. But I don't care. This is underground shit. We keep it small, and it's a concerted effort to build an intellectual milieu, and that is not done overnight, and it's definitely not done at a big scale. It's done through serious engagement with a cohort of others, or in my case, with many cohorts on many lines of thought that are all interrelated in various ways. And so here's to my fellow travelers and the people who are thinking about getting involved. Check out this advertisement or this PSA that I'm about to play. Just be advised, the critical media theory course starts 1 month later than it says because we pushed it back. So that's the only thing that needs to be corrected in this PSA. But besides that, I hope you will all enjoy. Take care.
And now a quick message from our sponsors. Just kidding. This will be neither quick nor from any corporate or state sponsorship. What follows is a description of Theory Underground, a thank you to its patrons, information about the upcoming tour, and 3 brand new courses that you might want to enroll in. Stay for the whole thing to get promo codes to save on those courses or information about the financial aid scholarship.
Theory Underground is a philosophy lecture course gated social media site and publishing house by and for working class intellectuals and renegade academics. The subject matters dealt with at Theory Underground are the most important, yet neglected for understanding ourselves, the world, and ways of possibly changing it.
Because we have no corporate or state sponsors, only a small band of patrons, everything in this first year of operation helps immensely. Special thank yous to Bert, Nance, Marilyn, Carl, and Adam for your help in the $50 per month patron tier. If you want to help but the $50 tier is too much, consider donating towards meals and gasoline via Venmo or PayPal.
The gasoline is for our countrywide tour of the U.S., where we aim to meet with supporters of this effort and do events to draw in new people who do not necessarily belong to marketing demographics predetermined by the attention economy. We will be giving lectures, leading discussions, and promoting several brand new books. Our goal is to only go to towns and cities where we have personal invitations from at least one person. We are doing this underground style, which for the hardcore punk scene in the US meant coming for long enough to get to know the area and do multiple events, not this modern treadmill of a new city each night in an attempt to maximize fame and profit. If you are interested in being a host, guide, or volunteer, then please fill out the form at https://theory-underground.com/US-tour-2023. In an attempt to utilize the resources made publicly available, we will be using libraries for most of our events. So if you have a local library card and can reserve a space for us, we would most appreciate it. Alternatively, some of you might have access to pretty epic venue spaces. Just let us know ahead of time.
Now for the courses. The 3 upcoming courses are What is Sex?, Digital Literacy and CMT, Critical Media Theory, and Being and Time. All courses at Theory Underground are available after the fact on demand, but some people get a lot more out of doing it live with a cohort.
If you are looking to think deeply about the devices we have become reliant on while experimenting with new ways of reclaiming your attention span and relationship with yourself and others, then check out Digital Literacy and Critical Media Theory, a course that is structured to combat the attention economy while strategically using some of its tools to help us gain a freer relationship to our devices. If interested, an introduction to this course will be shared at the end of this video. Just make sure to click on it. The lectures for this course take place on the second Sunday of every month for 6 months, starting in May. If you sign up at Tier 3, you also get access to the recovery group component, which also meets once per month. Enroll with promo code CMTEarlyBirdYT before May 13th for 20% off.
If you are frustrated by the discourse revolving around gender ideology, left and right, then join us in thinking deeper about sex. Cadell Last of Philosophy Portal is joining up with Theory Underground to teach Alenka Zupančic's What is Sex?, one of the most succinct and cutting-edge works of theory dealing with the topic. Zupančič is one of the Slovenian circle's most incisive critics of both naive progressivism and reactionary tendencies when it comes to thinking about the relationship between sex, culture, and subjectivity. If interested, watch 3 Reasons to Read What is Sex?, which will be shared on screen at the end of this video. What is Sex begins in May and goes through June, meeting for 4 lecture sessions and, surprise, you will actually get to meet Alenka Zupančič herself. Use promo code WHATISSEXEARLYBIRDYT before May 7th for 20% off.
And just so you know, everybody, don't stress the capitalization. I just make it that way so it's more readable. It's not case sensitive. Being in Time is one of the most notorious, profound, and difficult works of philosophy from the last 200 years. Its deconstruction of modernity and fundamental challenge to scientism is a prerequisite rite of passage for any thinker who wants to seriously engage with continental philosophy, social theory, or world change. In this course, you will learn about what Heidegger means by being in the world, Dasein, being unto death, and so many other crucial developments. But more important than all these buzzwords is just taking on this work itself and wrestling with the text. Doing so will rapidly accelerate your reading comprehension abilities and simultaneously challenge some of your most deep-seated presuppositions. As before, an introductory video to this course is shared on the end screen of this video, or can be accessed from the links in the description. Being in Time Division 1 starts in June and ends July 22nd. Division 2 begins August 19th and goes through October. To sign up for Division 1 today, use the promo code BEINGINTIME EARLYBIRDYT before the end of May for 20% off.
If you feel obstructed by the cost of these courses, then we have good news. But before getting into the financial aid info, why are there even price tags at all, much less tiered pricing? First, because some people just want to audit, whereas others want constructive critical feedback or even one-on-one sessions. The tiers exist so that you can get the value you are seeking while compensating me, Dave, fairly for the time and energy required.
Second, the prices set for these courses aim to make Theory Underground sustainable, meaning that it will bring in enough to pay for the costs of the operation, including my personal bills, since I want to be a co-earner in the household when my soon-to-be wife and I start a family.
Thirdly, people tend to take the things they pay for more seriously, and we want you to get the most out of this experience.
With those reasons aside, we do not seek to exclude anyone who is struggling just to get by. We have a financial aid scholarship option for people who are currently between jobs or who live in a country on a cheap currency, like many of you who watch from Thailand, India, Mexico, or Poland, to name a few of the residents of some of the people who have already received financial aid scholarships in the last couple of months. Because I know what trying to study theory under the stresses of housing insecurity and poverty is like, the scholarship was set up during the first month of operation. Simply fill it out at https://theory-underground.com/scholarship.
Last but not least, stay tuned for the Theory Underground app, coming soon to an app store near you, on your phone.
Yeah, and seriously, thank you for listening or watching to this point, and yeah.
Thanks.
We look forward to taking these courses with you.
Bye.